Whose phone is that? Who's that? Oh, it's her phone. She on hold. You're Robert's face. He's all. She didn't know.
We got a few more people filing in here at the Sequoia room. We'll get started in just a minute.
Okay, I'll let Michelle know.
You guys ready to get started? Can you hear us online as well?
Yes, we can.
Yep, can.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, so this is the Regional Transportation Plan and Sustainable Communities Strategy Roundtable for Wednesday, July 24th, 2024 at 2 p.m. And if you wish to address the committee during the public comment portion of the agenda, click on the reactions at the bottom center of your PC screen, select the hand icon, click the icon to raise hand. Your digital hand will now be raised. Those addressing the committee must state their first and last name and agency for the record. Please turn on your microphone before speaking to facilitate electronic access, and no person shall speak until recognized by the chair. And so first, welcome everybody. And is there any introductions that we need to make at this time before we do roll call?
We'll do the staff introductions and then we'll have Denise do the roll call. I'm Paul Herman, Principal Regional Planner.
Shishan Fan, Senior Planner at First Norfolk.
Ophelia Bundes, Associate Regional Planner. and Robert Phipps, Interim Executive Director.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you. And Denise, can we do roll call, please?
Yes, we have City of Clovis,
Here.
City of Coalinga, City of Fireball, City of Fowler, City of Fresno,
Here.
City of Huron, City of Kerman, City of Kingsburg,
Here.
City of Mendota, City of Orange Cove,
Right here.
City of Parlier, City of Reedley,
Here.
City of San Joaquin,
Here.
City of Sanger, City of Selma, County of Fresno,
Here.
Air District,
Present.
LAFCO,
Here.
Caltrans.
Here.
Vax. Clovis Transit,
Here.
Fresno County Rural Transit Agency,
Here.
PG&E,
Here.
T-Mobile, Tranquility Resource Conservation District, U.S. Green Building Council,
Here.
Sequoia Riverland Trust,
Here.
Inspiration Transportation,
Present.
Fresno Cycling Club,
Present.
Dr. Molina Public Health Advocate, Self-Help Enterprises, EDC, Fresno Chamber of Commerce, Westlands Water District,
Here.
State Center Community College District,
Here.
Measure C Oversight Committee, League of Women Voters of Fresno, Public at Large Michelle Roman,
Here.
Public at Large Paul Marquez,
Here.
Public at Large Michelle Lopez.
Present.
Okay,
Great. Thank you. So next up, we have new information discussion items. Approve the minutes of the meeting for the June 26, 2024. Is there any member comments on our minutes from the last meeting? Any public comment? So I'll be open for a motion to approve. Okay, thank you. Do I have a second?
Amy Hance, I'll second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. And I'll call for a vote, please.
we do the roll call. Oh, you can just do by acclamation.
Just by,
Yeah.
okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed?
Aye. Aye.
Hearing no opposed. Okay, thank you. All right, next up, item B, Environmental Justice Subcommittee update. Paul?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. For this item, I'll be going over the EJ subcommittee that met on July 10th, and I'll be reporting out what was discussed and the next steps for their process and how it relates to the roundtable generally. The EJ analysis identifies the impacts of environmental justice communities on selected sustainable community strategy scenarios. The EJ analysis will help policymakers, local jurisdictions, and the public understand the equity-related implications of implementing the RTP in the region. The EJ subcommittee will advise on the environmental justice population definition, the population thresholds for the EJ population, which we are calling the equity priority communities and the disadvantaged communities, and performance measures for the EJ analysis. Just a brief history of what the EJ analysis, the community definition has been in prior RTPs. So in 2014, roughly 35% of Fresno County's population was within the defined environmental justice area. And this was made up of low income and or minority ethnicity population. In 2018, 30% of the population was also within this EJ definition, which was made up of, again, low income and or minority population, as well as a 5% population in the vulnerable community, which looked at 6 separate burdens to those specific EJ communities. In 2022, this was raised to 64% of the population, and this really mirrored how the state looks at disadvantaged communities through Senate Bill 535 and the Callan Virus Screen process. And so this used the minority population and or low income population equal or greater than the county average. And for the 2026 proposal, which we proposed on July 10th to the EJ subcommittee, we are looking at 2 sets of EJ analysis. The first will be the equity priority communities, which will look again at about 33% of the population based on Fresno's regional demographic data. And the second set of analysis we'll be doing for this cycle will be a SB 535 disadvantaged communities, so similar to the process that was done in 2022. And again, that looks at state and federal socioeconomic and pollution burden data. So for the equity priority communities, these are the 4 demographic factors and metrics that we'll be looking at to help define the EPC. It'll be first the people of color minority factor, which will be a percentage of the non-white and or Hispanic resident population. For low income, it'll be a percent of households with the income below 200% of the federal poverty level. The third factor will be a linguistic isolation or limited English proficiency. And this is a percent of limited English speaking households as defined by the US Census. And the final is a housing cost burden. And this is a percent of households paying more than 30% of their income towards housing costs. And this is for both renters and owners. So to go through the schedule and how the EJ subcommittee will interact with the roundtable, I'll just be going through the first several of these. This is looking at the entire 2-year process, but on July 10th, we had that EJ kickoff meeting where we outlined the staff recommendation that I just covered. At our next meeting on September 18th, we will then be looking for their recommendation and approval of that EJ area. That then will move to the roundtable for input as well as a recommendation through our TTC PAC and policy board process. This will feed into a community outreach for project needs in the fall and further meetings in regards to performance indicators and modeling efforts in the future. And that really is all of the items I wanted to talk about today on the EJ subcommittee. And if there's any questions for myself, I'm happy to answer those.
We have any questions for Paul? Any questions from the public on this one? Okay, thank you so much. Next up, item C, Programming Technical Working Group Update. Ophelia?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Ophelia Bundes. I'm an Associate Regional Planner here at Fresno COG, and today I'm going to be speaking, giving an update on the Programming Technical Working Group. So we met yesterday on July 23rd, and we discussed, basically gave a brief overview of the Regional Transportation Plan, basically mentioned all 8 chapters that are included, but mostly the focus of Chapter 5, Financing Mobility, which discusses the investment decisions and revenue assumptions contained in the Regional Transportation Plan and the Sustainable Community Strategies. In addition to that, it identifies the anticipated revenue sources over the next 20 years, and to be specific, it will be 23 years. And then in addition to that, we went over the RTP project evaluation criteria, basically an overview of what it is, which is it is used to score and prioritize projects submitted during the RTP call for projects. And of course, the role of the committee is to discuss potential revisions and updates to the previous 2022 RTP evaluation criteria. We also went over the project scenario tool, which is used to maintain integrity of the project scoring criteria and provide an objective methodology to reflect each scenario's funding priorities. And the project scenario tool takes scores received in the project evaluation criteria and weighs each score based on the priorities emphasized in each scenario under consideration. Okay, and then more regarding the overview. So basically, the 2026 project evaluation criteria update. What are the objectives? Well, whenever possible, to ensure community values and funding purposes priorities are represented, and it should clearly define and be based on quantifiable metrics, and should be applied only to project modes when are appropriate and relevant. In addition to that, we went over the timeline. So again, here you can see the first meeting we had, which was a kickoff meeting that started yesterday. And we went ahead and just went over the overview of the project evaluation criteria. We did send out an email with a copy of the whole PowerPoint to all of those who attended or who were in the emailing list, along with a spreadsheet with the evaluation criteria so they could review and hopefully get their comments to us by July 31st. That way we could go ahead and include those comments or discuss those topics during our second meeting, which will be on August 1st. After that August 1st meeting, we'll have another meeting on August 13th, where we will hopefully reach a decision. So we could go ahead and have it by the deadline of the PEC recommendation information for the RTP roundtable agenda, which will take place, or we'll have the agenda released on August 21st. And then that roundtable meeting with that recommendation will be on August 28th, where hopefully if approved, it will go on to TTC and PAC on September 13th. And then finally, the Fresno COG Policy Board meeting on September 26th, where the final PEC should get approval. And then you could also see at the very end, that would kick off the call for projects that will begin on October 1st and go on to November 16th. And this is an information item, and I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Is there any questions on this item, the members? Any questions from the public? Okay, thank you so much. All right, moving on to item D, the 2026 RTP SCS demographic forecast. Okay, next up.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shenfa. I will briefly introduce the demographic forecast process for the 2026 RTP SCS. So the new population projection updates will cover the elements shown on this slide: the population, employment, income, age, race, school enrollment, also housing-related data, like the household size and the housing units. So the new projection will be updated to cover year from 2023 to 2060, and by each jurisdiction's sphere of influence. We apply the cohort component method for the population projection. Staff and our consultant have updated the latest population data in our model, which include taking the new benchmark with 2020 census data and also the 2023 population estimation from the California Department of Finance. And also we update the parameter like birth rate, death rate from the recent vital statistics. For the future years projection, we will use a county level projection from the California DOF, their demographic research unit, as a control. And also we will consult with each jurisdiction to check the SOI levels data once we have the draft projection. In general, the population growth in our region is slowing down, and the birth rate decline is a major contributor to it. We can see this chart showing a birth rate trend in our county in last 15 years. And then I wanted to show how the latest DOF population projection looks like compared to our projection used in 22 RTP. So on this chart, the blue line is our projection used in 22 RTP, which matched with the DOF projection released in 2019. And the green line is what DOF updates in 2023. So in the year 2035, our GHG target evaluation year, we expect to see 7% less population compared to the 22 RTP projection, and the population growth from 2020 to 2035 will be 52% less. And in the year 2050, we'll have 11% less population in total compared to the 22 RTP projection, and the growth from 2020 to 2050 will be 58% less. So the DOF is planned to release the full projection series based on the Census 2020 data this week or next week. We will update our county total data to match with the latest projection from DOF and then start to consult with each jurisdiction. So for the employment part, we observe that the unemployment rate is back to pre-pandemic level since the 2022 summertime, and we will assume a stable employment growth in the future years. In this process, we will apply the Wooden Pool's economic projection data for our region, and we will use the economic modeling tool to adjust the employment number by future projection. And then we will still ask for advice and opinion from each jurisdiction. So for the housing data, we update our projection tool with the recent vacancy rate and housing development data, and also information from the jurisdiction's housing elements updates. For this part, we will also discuss with each jurisdiction. And the final part is the schedule. So we'll use August and September 2 months to consult with each jurisdiction and require for approval for the RTP roundtable in October. And in this November, we'll ask for approval for the TDC impact and then the policy board. Thank you. And we'll come to any questions.
Is there any questions on this item? Any questions from the public? All right, thank you. Moving on, item D, item E, the new challenges for the 2026 RTP SCS.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'll briefly be going over the challenges facing the region, Fresno COG, and the roundtable going into the next cycle of the RTP SCS. Every cycle, there's new challenges presented to us, whether it's new laws and statutes or regional impacts that are different from the previous cycle. So I'll be going through kind of those changes facing this process. First, I want to talk about the new California Air Resources Board requirements. In May of this year, Fresno COG received feedback from CARB on the 2022 RTP SCS with 10 recommendations for the upcoming 2026 cycle. The recommendations ranged from requesting improved modeling and data to the development of entirely new implementation and monitoring plans that have never been requested by CARB, of Fresno COG, or any other MPO in the state of California. These recommendations and requests from CARB present new challenges for Fresno COG as they will further spread limited staff resources to accommodate these additional tasks. We are working with CARB to align priorities for the 2026 RTP SCS cycle and see which recommendations can be met on a longer time horizon, given that the work has already begun on the 2026 cycle. And so we'll be constantly in communication with CARB staff to understand which elements of these recommendations are going to be required for this cycle and which can be on a longer lead of development time so that we can include them in future RTP cycles. Another assumption is our telecommunity assumptions for the future and horizon years. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, telecommuting has become an established work model for several job sectors nationwide and around the world. In the last couple of years since the pandemic, we've seen telecommuting fluctuate in its use amongst different companies, job sectors, and within government agencies. In the 2022 RTP SCS, telecommuting was an identified strategy to help Fresno COG and the region meet its vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas reduction targets. Moving forward, staff will be researching studies and surveys that address the long-term prospects of telecommuting in the Fresno region and seeing how we can, make adjustments to our strategy to make reasonable assumptions for future telecommuting targets as a means of helping reduce VMT and GHG in the region. Another impact that we're seeing that Shi-Chen just walked us through is the reduced population growth forecast within Fresno County. And so this slower growth for the county's population has consequences of the region's ability to meet our future VMT and GHG reduction targets. Previously, Fresno COG was able to assign future population growth to higher density households, which would reduce the per capita VMT and GHG for the region. But with population growth slowing and the region's VMT and GHG reduction targets remaining unchanged, this presents a challenge to be able to meet these targets with the existing land use and housing densities with a reduced population forecast in the future. So it's another challenge to be aware of as we start working on this cycle of the RTP and SES. And then finally, related to that is really the land use challenges facing Fresno County. Over the last few years, several land use related issues have emerged, which presents new challenges and uncertainty for Fresno COG as we develop our next RTP SES. Fresno COG must make long-term land use assumptions, which greatly impacts the modeling and performance indicators of our scenarios. Fresno COG will work with the jurisdictions on how best to plan for future housing and commercial land uses. And just as an example, we've seen the SETA development at the city of Fresno, the county's new 2024 general plan update, and the city of Clovis's affordable housing plan all see shifts in the last 12 months. And so we're taking all this into account as we develop our land use assumptions over the next 20 years. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Paul on this item? Yes.
Yes, at our first meeting, our interim executive director said we've become very well acquainted with the term VMT. Also, of course, you mentioned VMT targets and greenhouse gas targets. And having served on prior roundtable gatherings, Christine Kai kept us informed as to what our greenhouse gas targets were. So I'm curious, number one, what are our current greenhouse gas reduction targets and for what time periods, and what are our VMT targets?
Yeah, so our greenhouse gas and VMT targets are 13% below 2020 levels by 2035. And this process goes through a target setting process with the California Air Resources Board every 8 years. And currently those were established in 2018. There is a target setting process that is ongoing, but it will affect the next RTP SES cycle, not the existing one, because the target setting won't be completed till 2026. And that's when we plan to submit this cycle of the RTP SES. So the target setting process that will happen over the next 2 years will then be applied into the 2030 RTP SES cycle. Yes. Yep.
And asking you to do some prognosticating towards a dangerous question. Ask, how difficult do you think it might be to get there?
It's definitely going to be challenging, especially given population forecast reductions as laid out by Shi-Chen in the previous item. But that's what the task is in front of us. So we do need to find strategies to help us get there. Telecommuting, van pool, carpool, transit. There's a lot of different, bike and ped. There's a lot of different strategies. And so that will be kind of the task in front of us over the next 2 years is to get there.
And then the VMT targets, because obviously to get to your VMT target, you want to reduce SOV, single occupancy vehicles. You want people to do more carpooling, van pooling, riding buses, and more people walking and bicycling, which is going to be a challenge, to say the least, especially bicycling in this kind of heat. So what is our VMT target?
It is also 13%. It's tied to the GHG target as well. So yeah, that'll be a similar exercise, and that's really in the modeling effort. So once we've gotten we do the call for projects this fall, they'll be brought into the modeling effort, and then through that effort, we understand, or we do modeling to try to better understand what the VMT reduction occurs with the projects that are available to us as submitted by the jurisdictions and by the public. And then we, determine which scenario best gets us to that target.
So basically, then you're hoping, it seems to me, and I'm crawling out on a limb on this statement. You're hoping that the local jurisdictions are going to submit more transit projects and more active transportation projects and minimize the capacity increasing projects, which have a tendency to do induce demand. And then, of course, when you start developing your scenarios, you're going to probably start developing your scenarios, you're going to lean towards scenarios to do higher density development.
Yeah, there'll be a range of scenarios that kind of address different scenarios that focus on transit or higher density development. Yes. I do see we have a question on the line, so I do want to allow other folks to
No,
get the
Robert
opportunity.
wanted to jump in too.
I was just gonna say, Nick, you get the gold star. I mean, you just kind of wrapped it up, the whole thing with a nice bow on it. The only other comment that I would add is, in addition to the challenges, Paul kind of alluded to this with on the land use side, is to know that we do work within the constraints of the general plans from the jurisdictions, right? We have no land use authority to speak of Fresno Cog itself. And so we're working within the constraints of the general plans that are sent to us. And so when we talk about, you mentioned the infill development and trying to project, the housing, the populations that could be moved into the infill development, that is within the constraint of what the general plans are already assuming. So we're working within those guidelines to begin with. And so that is another constraint upon us that we're trying to manage as well, an additional challenge. But yes, you capture it very, very nicely and succinctly. Thank you.
Then we have somebody with the hand raised online.
Yeah, Adam.
So just, I guess this is more of a comment, just following up on Nick's questions. As I understand it, having participated in a few rounds of this process before, under SB 375, the goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through changes in land use and transportation. So the land use side definitely is an important part of it. And I do understand, of course, that a COG doesn't have land use planning authority in terms of being able to make permitting decisions on particular land use projects, and the scenarios that we're considering in terms of the regional transportation plan are constrained by general plans, in the sense of, you can't have something that specifically contradicts a general plan. But as I understand it from previous rounds of this process and from working on the regional transportation planning process and in other parts of the San Joaquin Valley, there is considerable latitude to develop different scenarios within those constraints, including scenarios that are more that place a greater emphasis on infill development and conservation, and to make decisions about transportation investments accordingly. So just to be clear, I mean, my understanding is that there definitely is a role for the regional transportation planning process to play in terms of not directly making decisions on land use in a way that would contradict the general plans, but obviously decisions about transportation have a considerable influence on where and how communities develop, and those decisions really are central to this process.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. Couldn't have put it better myself, really. That is essentially the process that we're looking at, is that while we don't have, as Robert stated, the land use authority, We do receive general plans, and we do look at the transportation projects that are submitted to us and develop scenarios that will either encourage higher density use of those land uses that are submitted to us, or kind of go away from higher density uses of those land uses. But yeah, that is essentially the process that is before us. Thank you, Adam.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering, and thank you so much for your sort of questions as always, Nick. For the 30% below 2020 levels, right, you said, how do the 2020 levels compare to the levels before? Are they like the all-time high? Where are we at there? Did they dip? They dipped in that year, right? I'm just curious, you know, what numbers we are playing with there. And then I hear a lot about land use and active transportation, which are really important. But I was wondering how the conversion to EV plays into this. Is this another strategy? Yeah, wondering about those.
Yeah, so on the EV point, this has been a point that we've been in discussion with the Air Resources Board about. There's differing opinion on how much local jurisdictions can claim the EV reduction on at least on GHG, because they always make the point that EVs don't reduce VMT, they do reduce GHG. So there is kind of a little bit of a disconnect between those two schools of thought. So it is something that we're constantly in communication with them about, and it's just something we'll work through in the process. I expect that we will have some EV kind of the ability to claim EV growth in EVs as a reduction tool on at least the greenhouse gases front. On your VMT question, I don't have them in front of me. It'll probably be good for me to we'll lay this out for you in a future meeting, exactly where we're at and kind of what the future projections kind of look like and how it compares historically to VMT and greenhouse gases in California and Fresno. But yeah, that is, 2020 was a different year. We did actually meet our targets, but only because there was a pandemic and not for any other reason. So it's something that, technically we did meet those targets, but moving forward, while 2020 is behind us and essentially we won't be doing analysis on what does 2020 look like for VMT and GHG. The targets to get below the 2020 date, 13% by 2035, that will be the focus of what we're looking at in this RTP SCS. And those targets remain unchanged. Like I said, the target setting process happens every 8 years. And so we're still going to be needing to hit our 13% below 2020 by 2035. And so that's the targets we'll need to meet in our scenario development.
Thank you. Any other comment? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, very interesting discussion, and of course, competing interests with GHG and VMT reduction. So, bottom line for kind of the public to understand that, in order to meet the greenhouse gas and the VMT targets, there's going to be certain types of investments that are going to be discouraged, or how is that going to be approached in this process?
I think for us, we look at more of the other way of looking at that, where there's other projects that we maybe want to encourage instead of discouraging any type of particular project. The different scenarios will essentially have different projects within them, because each scenario will have an assigned budget that will then determine how much funding is going to go towards roads, how much will go towards transit, how much will go towards bikeways and sidewalks. And so within those scenarios, there'll be essentially different projects that we can evaluate and see if we can hit our targets with those projects in each of the scenarios. Some scenarios will perform better than others, depending on the makeup of those projects. So that's essentially kind of the analysis that we'll be moving forward with over the next year and a half, is really looking at getting a wealth of projects. Typically, we receive about 3,000 projects in our call for projects from all the jurisdictions. And each scenario typically has about 2,000 projects within it. So there's quite a few projects that don't make a particular scenario. So within those 1,000 extra projects, there's actually quite a bit of difference in the types of projects by mode, right? There'll be more transit projects in a certain scenario compared to another. And so with those extra projects that don't get selected within a particular scenario, we can create several different scenarios and compare them and evaluate how they perform against each other and really lay that out to our roundtable and our TTC PAC and the policy board in order to make a determination on what's the best fit for our region and for our process. So that'll really be how we decipher how we're going to approach our VMT and GHG reduction targets.
And another axis on which that can be measured is the timing of the funding. So which projects are funded when, because over a 23-year range, right, you have what's called banding of the projects in, say 5-year increments. So you could have some projects or project types that are funded, groups of projects that are funded in near years versus outer years. And like you would with the TIP, Paul, I know you're familiar with that process. And so the notion that you can also, in addition to which projects your selection, also in terms of when you're funding those projects, when you're targeting those projects for funding across the 23-year planning horizon, would also factor into the consideration.
Yeah, I could see it as, the larger cities, metro areas as having that flexibility for that portfolio of projects. But just looking at, some of the smaller cities out there that, may be kind of limited in the type of improvements, or maybe it'll be masked or it'll be balanced with the improvements or the less GHG or VMT inducing projects within the metro area in order to make that happen for the outlying cities and communities. And I was just looking at it from just the equitable view of how transportation investments are being made for the Fresno County region.
Yeah, and I think Paul kind of addressed this before, but with regard to the question about the GHG versus VMT, you mentioned that we don't get to take credit. So you have a state policy for electrification, for example, but we're not able to take credit under the state's guidelines. We're not able to take credit for the GHG savings that comes about as the result of that mandate, that state mandate toward electrification. So the fact that you will have GHG reductions that occur as electrification occurs, we're not able to capitalize on that, right? So we have to then kind of turn more toward VMT reduction to see additional GHG reduction. And again, an additional challenge that we're going to be dealing with.
Yes, go ahead.
So in terms of the project that can be funded, how is your funding restricted? Are you guys just looking at infrastructure, or do you guys also look at educational investment, encouragement investment? Is that part of this reduction?
So typically we look at really infrastructure funding and revenues that fund capital infrastructure projects. We encourage educational campaigns by jurisdictions, transit agencies, nonprofits, those that want to help with that message. But strictly for this process and for the modeling effort, it needs to have a quantifiable aspect that we can model and measure. And so essentially, yeah, we look at the infrastructure costs and the revenues that fund infrastructure projects specifically.
Makes a lot of sense, and there's a lot of need for capital investment. I think in addition, the measurable part, there's a big part of that culture plays in this, right? How do we get around the social cycle of culture? I mean, the strategy could also look for other funding opportunities to encourage. But on this cultural piece, I just see a lot of need for engagement projects. And I want to make clearly that that is not because I work in the nonprofit field, but in general, right, people need to engage in this. I see a lot of movement at schools that are tied to that. Actually, good outcomes if you engage people. So I think as we want to reach those targets, this need for educational investment is there in whatever way. Yeah, just wondering, how that could fit in this. And if it's outside of this funding pot, how that can be considered within this process.
Well, and that does get to, and I think we've discussed this a little bit, we've begun to touch on this as with, for example, the Safe Routes to Schools approach, right? And additional revenue streams that we enjoy right now, but that, we would have to maintain in order to have them considered as part of the RTP in future cycles, such as Measure C, and the potential for additional funding from, for example, a local sales tax measure that could be accessed for programs such as Safe Routes to Schools that would have, say, an educational component to them, for example. And so, yeah, there is that potential. And, we also have to be prepared. One of the reasons why we try and make a point of getting as many projects as we can into the RTP. I mean, the fundamental answer to your question of what are the projects, how do we delineate them? The first order is constrained, what we call constrained versus unconstrained, right? So based on historic revenue projections and sources, we establish a revenue projection that makes up our constrained list, right? That's what we can reasonably demonstrate historically based on historical projections of what will be funded. But then we have an additional list that is the unconstrained that we can't definitively say will be funded. But if additional revenues were to become available, which happens all the time, right? If Congress decides to open up a new revenue source as part of a transportation reauthorization bill, for example, or if the state decides to fund additional transportation projects, or as you say, education programs, whatever the case may be, that we have a suite of projects that we can then advance through that. They're already in our planning documents ready and waiting to be funded. And so that's how we try to address that, anticipation.
I just want to touch on one more point. We will be, once the project scoring criteria process is completed over the next month or so, we will be coming back to the roundtable, specifically talking about the revenue projections and kind of how we look at scenarios and how we're going to build them in this round of the RTP SES. And so we'll have a much deeper dive into that aspect in the next couple of meetings. It may be August or September, but yeah, we'll have a much deeper dive on that aspect of the program.
But we will make a note of getting you the information about the cycle over cycle GHG reductions, where we were in 2020 and what 13% looks like in metric tons, reductions for the GHG and also presumably for the VMT, not metric tons, but actual miles reduced.
Okay, any other comments? Any comments from the public? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to other items. Any items from staff?
Just that last point I made, I just want to let folks know that at our next meeting in August, we anticipate we'll be bringing forth the project evaluation criteria, which is how we score projects for the RTP SES. So I just want to make folks aware our first official voting item, besides our minutes approval, will be at our next meeting in August.
Okay, thank you. Any items from members? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to public presentations. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the roundtable on items within its jurisdiction, but not on this agenda. Note, prior to action by the roundtable on any item on this agenda, the public may comment on that item, and scheduled comments may be limited to 3 minutes. Are there any public presentations at this time? See anything in here? Nothing online? Okay, we'll officially adjourn this meeting then. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you so much for attending.
Thank you.